Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan. He's a member of the House Budget Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. He's also a member of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, which means that right now you are the person that we want to talk to. Congressman, we have less than 14 hours left until federal funding runs out. Is a shutdown unavoidable right now? Just give it to me straight, because the American people are getting more and more anxious as the clock winds down.
Well, Charles, first, thanks for having me on. And to answer the question directly, it is completely avoidable. There are 433 members right now sitting in the House of Representatives. Back in May, over 300 of us voted for a budget compromise that set spending levels for 2024. Kevin McCarthy walked away from that deal. But I'll guarantee you this, if he put those same numbers, that same deal on the floor of the House of Representatives, it would pass and there'd be no shutdown. The Senate could take that up. Obviously, the Senate has its arcane rules that make it difficult for them to move quickly, but the House could do its part to avoid a shutdown. The question is not can we, but will Kevin McCarthy place the American people's interests ahead of his own narrow political interest, his speakership? That's really what this is about. The soap opera that is the Republicans in Washington is playing out before our very eyes. But the problem is, this is about the American people. People won't be able to get help from the Veterans Administration. Veterans may not be able to get the care they need. People won't be able to, to fly safely knowing that the FAA and the TSA is in place to make sure that they're cared for. There are just so many consequences, dire consequences for the American people, that it kind of makes this clown show that we're witnessing seem so much more serious than what it looks like when it's sort of viewed from Washington eyes. Out across the country, this is serious business. Republicans don't seem to get that. They think it's about Kevin McCarthy. It's not.
It is serious business. And speaking of Kevin McCarthy, he is one of the most spoken about individuals that we have right now in the news. And in a post last night on X, which is formerly known as Twitter, even though it keeps changing its name like Kanye West, Kevin McCarthy wrote, after a meeting with House Republicans this evening, it's clear the misguided Senate bill has no path forward and is dead on arrival. End quote. The same pretty much can be said about the bills that House Republicans are now trying to draft. But what are your thoughts on the Senate bill? Is there any chance that, in the interest of time, that the House could potentially kind of sort of copy the homework of the Senate as a means of moving things along at a more rapid rate in order to get it done in the House?
We could, and many of us have suggested that Speaker McCarthy simply do that. And if the votes aren't there, well, then he can explain that. I believe the votes would be there. We do have a difficulty getting the Senate to act quickly. But the House could take what the Senate is working on, that basic framework, and put it on the floor, and I think you'd see votes. You'd see a sufficient number of votes in order for the House to do its work to keep the government open. So this is really not a question as to whether a solution exists. The solution exists. And in fact, most of the Democrats and Republicans that I talk to here on Capitol Hill basically agree what the ultimate resolution of this standoff will look like. But let's keep in mind, why are we not able to get to that point? It's because Kevin McCarthy himself changed the rules of the House, agreed to a change of the rules, got it implemented, that handed the most extreme members of Congress the ability to call a vote on his speakership at their own whim. That's not something that is being done to him. That is something he did to himself. So Kevin McCarthy has to stop being a political day trader and believing the only thing he has to do is get to midnight every day and then start all over again the next day, and realize there are consequences to the decisions he makes every single day. And unfortunately, these aren't just political consequences. Who cares about the politics? These are consequences that are going to be felt by the American people. And it's just completely irresponsible that he continues to put his own narrow self-interest of being called the Speaker, as opposed to actually doing the job of being Speaker, over the interests of the American people. I'm baffled by it.
Congressman Kildee, before we go, you've raised a good point in terms of Kevin McCarthy, his leadership, and sort of how it has been the downfall of where we are in many respects. It's no secret that he and Matt Gaetz have not necessarily been the greatest of friends, even as it was Kevin McCarthy who was trying to secure the speakership and Matt Gaetz stood in his way. There have been talks and reporting that Matt Gaetz is now speaking to individual members about potentially challenging McCarthy's leadership and a motion to vacate or something along those lines. Can you tell us what those efforts have looked like? Have you spoken to Congressman Gaetz? What has he said to you? Or at least what have you heard from your colleagues?
Well, I've talked to a lot of colleagues who've spoken with Congressman Gaetz. I had a brief conversation with him on the floor. Look, he and I don't share much in terms of ideology or approach to governing. We don't particularly appreciate the work of Speaker McCarthy, but for completely different reasons, for sure. What he's trying to do is use the tool that Kevin McCarthy gave him against Kevin McCarthy. If the Speaker wants to end this, just go back to the rules that we had before he became Speaker, and let's get rid of this nonsense that allows even the most deranged members of Congress to have superior authority over the Speaker of the House himself. This power-sharing agreement that he's entered into with the most extreme members of Congress is really the cause of all of this. And it's a huge mistake, and it's a reflection on his obsession with being called Speaker instead of doing the job of being the Speaker, leading.